This is Focus with Jack Caudill.
Good evening, I'm Jack Caudill. Welcome to this month's edition of Focus. This month we're talking about the methamphetamine epidemic here in the area. Three guests with us to talk about that. Thom, he is the Pennington County Sheriff. Mark Vargo is the Pennington County State's Attorney, and Deanna Nolan with us as well. She is the Clinical Director of the Care Campus here in Rapid City as part of Addiction Treatment Services. A little background, the methamphetamine epidemic, as I said, continues in the area. The Pennington County Sheriff's Office says there were 1,220 drug arrests or meth arrests in the county in 2018. That is up 37% from what we saw in 2017. That's about 70% of the total felony drug arrests in the county for the year. The drug problem is not showing any signs of slowing down. Felony drug arrests in the county to this point this year up 65% over what they were at this point last year. Statewide, the Attorney General's office says drug arrests were up 7.2% in 2017, the last year they have stats compiled for. That is up 49% in the 5 years up to that point. Sheriff Thom, we're going to start to you. Looking at the meth epidemic, from your perspective, how bad is it right now?
It's epidemic levels. It's permeated everything we do. It impacts crime on the street, impacts the jail, impacts our addiction services, and the numbers are literally off the chart.
Now, Mark, as you look at it from the prosecutor's perspective, how bad is it from your guys' side?
It's not just that the numbers are different, and anytime you're 70% ahead of your previous record, that's a really bad sign. It's also the fact that we are straining the system in a lot of different ways that make it hard to see where it's going to end, because we are not providing services to the people that we are trying to get off of methamphetamine.
Now, Deanna Nolan, you deal with this from the treatment side. As you look at it, how bad is the meth epidemic right now?
I'm with Sheriff Thom. It's off the charts. We try to provide the services and we have long-term treatment, but trying to get folks in, it's difficult and it takes a lot of time.
Now, as we look at that, the numbers skyrocketing, what do you attribute that to, from the meth numbers going up so much year to year here in this area?
I'm not real sure, to be honest. It's been on the rise for a while. And I think probably part of it is lack of treatment services. There's been a lot of arrests and folks aren't getting the treatment they need. They're just going to jail and to prison and not getting the help that they need.
Mark, do you have a view on why these numbers continue to go up?
I'd echo what Deanna said. I think that we're failing on the treatment. The sheriff often talks about this being a three-legged stool. You need prevention, enforcement, and treatment. And we're really falling short on the treatment. We have done some things. We've tried to take a different approach, particularly in terms of law enforcement and the court system, in saying that we're not going to try to incarcerate our way out of this problem. But if you're not going to put people in jail for something, you then have to at least give them some help to see if you can change behaviors. Otherwise, you're simply saying, we've arrested you, now go home, don't do that again. And with an addiction like methamphetamine, that is not a recipe for success.
Kevin, how about you? What do you look at is the reason that these numbers continue to grow?
Yeah, it's clear we're not going to arrest our way out of it. I mean, if you look at the statewide data on methamphetamine over the last 6 years, we've gone up sixfold in arrest. So unless we put treatment services, and I would go even further and expound on the prevention side, we stopped doing prevention. So that's awareness with kids in the school. It's, if you remember, even like 10 years ago, there was billboards around the state. There was a statewide campaign. We stopped doing the prevention, and we aren't providing the treatment services.
And as you look at it now, what are some of the side effects? When we talk about meth, what are some of the other things that's causing? Obviously, it's causing big problems for the people that are taking meth, but how about society as a whole? What are the other areas that this stretches itself out into?
You know, I mean, the problem with methamphetamine is it's a stimulant, so there's a propensity for violence with people using methamphetamine. If you look at the last 3 or 4 of our officer-involved shootings, most of those had a nexus to people high on methamphetamine. If you look at people committing violent crime, domestic violence, assaults, etc., it's tied to methamphetamine. With the opioids, which you see epidemic in other parts of the country, you don't have that level of violence like you do with the methamphetamine. So just the sheer violence that comes with methamphetamine.
Now, Mark, you guys prosecute all kinds of crimes, obviously not just the drug crimes. But as you look at the other crimes, how much of that do you find meth somewhere in the background?
We did a 4-year sample 2 summers ago where we assigned some people to go case by case every violent felony that we prosecuted for that 4-year period. 60% of those were credibly linked to methamphetamine, either because there was meth on the scene or because there was a direct witness report of there being a meth nexus to that crime. So our violent crime in particular is very much driven by this methamphetamine epidemic.
Now, Deanna, with the people you see coming in for treatment for meth, what are some of the other issues that they fall in? Outside of just that drug abuse itself, what are some of the other issues that that presents to those people?
A lot of family issues, loss of children. With the methamphetamine use, that becomes all to the folks that are using it, and they neglect every other aspect of their lives.
And how much is this becoming overwhelming as far as treatment goes? Do you have more people that need treatment than you can give treatment to?
I would say yes, but getting them into treatment is always a problem. Oftentimes it's externally driven, and the folks don't want to come in. Or we get them in, they start for a couple days, and the addiction and the craving takes over, and they'll leave treatment and not complete it.
How difficult is a meth addiction to overcome compared to some of the other drugs that you deal with?
Very. We were talking a little bit earlier about the meth. It takes about 30 days to detoxify from it. So by the time you get folks started in treatment, 30 days into it, they're just barely starting to grasp any of the material that's being provided for them.
How often do you see those people that go through that 30-day treatment that then go right back into that cycle again?
If they leave after 30 days, it's pretty much 100%. If they stay for the whole program, success rates last a little longer. I don't have any specific statistics on that. But
how long is the whole program? If they stay for the whole program, what are we talking about?
6 months to a year long.
Is that inpatient, outpatient?
6 months we try to keep them residentially, and another 6 months on an outpatient basis just to keep them involved in services.
Okay. Mark, obviously this presents a lot of work for your office at the State's Attorney's Office. Does this become overwhelming for you? The amount of cases, meth cases that you deal with, the amount of cases that meth leads to in other crimes?
Absolutely, in both situations. What we have is, 1,200 arrests last year that were related to methamphetamine. That's 1,200 felony cases. Those tend to be cases that linger because a lot of those people are making bond. While on bond, we're providing no pretrial services to them. So they're very frequently staying in that same lifestyle. A lot of them are going to test positive at 24/7. So they come back in on probation violations or on bond violations. And that means that original case is now joined up with a new case, and the whole process starts over again. So you're stretching it out and really not addressing the underlying problem until sentencing at the very earliest.
Now, I'll sit down in court sometimes. There may be 10 cases running through the courtroom. 8 of those might somehow involve meth. Is that typical for what you're seeing down there?
Absolutely. If you're talking about cases that involve meth. So yesterday I covered a docket, one of our short cause dockets for sentencing. 10 sentencings on. 6 of them were methamphetamine cases. 2 more were cases that were meth driven. In other words, it was a meth addiction that led them to commit grand theft and burglary in those particular instances. And then 2 more that, at least from what I read, didn't have a direct nexus, but that's about 80%.
Now, Sheriff Thom, 1,220 meth arrests in the county last year. How much does that put a strain on your services and what you guys are able to do down there?
I mean, obviously it impacts us from an enforcement standpoint, and we need vigorous enforcement, but I think we're doing that well. But you look at what it does to the jail population then. We did a snapshot, it's probably been about 2 months ago now, of almost 600 people in the jail. There was 289 sitting there for possession of a controlled substance, and that's probably 70–80% methamphetamine possession of a controlled substance. So not only does it impact us on calls for service, but it impacts, the juvenile center, the adult facility, and of course the addiction services.
How long can this continue before you need more room in the jail, before you need changes in the jail services?
Well, we've had some pretty robust efforts through our Safety and Justice Challenge trying to safely reduce our local jail population. And had it not been for those efforts, frankly, we would be in trouble now and be talking to the County Commission about potentially building onto the jail, adding more beds. We're trying to stave that off with the different initiatives we're doing. If those are successful, hopefully we put that off for a while, but I don't have a firm answer for you.
Now, when you look at 1,220 arrests last year, how much of that is an increased amount of meth on the streets? How much of that is more vigorous enforcement by your office? Or is it a combination of both?
I think it's a combination. I mean, there's just a lot of methamphetamine available. I mean, years ago we used to seize ounces of methamphetamine. Routinely we seize pounds of methamphetamine on the streets. That tells you that the quantity is up, the purity is up. So yes, enforcement's very active in arresting a lot of people, but it's just availability of methamphetamine that has literally flooded the market.
All right, we have to take a break. We'll continue our look at the meth crisis here in the Black Hills when we come back with this month's edition of Focus. I'm Jack Caudill. Welcome back to this month's edition of Focus, talking about the meth epidemic here in western South Dakota. Mark Vargo is the Pennington County State's Attorney. Mark, how do we draw that balance between incarceration, punishment, and treatment? Where do we go in which direction?
One of the unfortunate things is we have let the situation get away from us to the extent that we're no longer really making that choice. We don't have much to offer in the way of treatment. And so I think what we promised to do with Senate Bill 70 in terms of trying not to put as many people in prison who had not yet been violent was a worthwhile idea. But it was premised on the idea that we were going to find other ways to change behaviors. Because ultimately what we are trying to do here is change behaviors. Otherwise, you can let all these people out of jail, but at a cost to the community and at a cost even to themselves. And so we're failing not only the community, we're failing even the defendants right now, because one way or the other, whether you put somebody in prison, where we had a fairly good methamphetamine program in the women's prison, or you provide them treatment on an outpatient or an inpatient basis while on bond, we're not doing either of those. And so that balance that you're talking about, I'd love to try to find the sweet spot there, but right now we are simply in a crisis mode trying to deal with each individual defendant as best we can.
So as you look at this, in an ideal world, what do you see we need to get this going back in the right direction?
First thing we need are pretrial services. Our defendants who make bond, or our defendants who are released on a recognizance bond, are essentially being let go and told, go forth, sin no more. Methamphetamine is an addiction strong enough that they are not going to be able to live up to that, and so they come back with multiple arrests in the system. That's driving some of our numbers, and it's certainly driving the court congestion. What we need to do is start by saying, we're going to let you out, we're not going to require you to pay a bond, but you're going to go to a drug treatment facility of some kind. We've been working with some of our tribal partners and state partners to see what we can create there. The Care Campus is a huge step in that direction. But if you look at 1,200 arrests last year, we're 70% ahead of that now. That 1,200, by the way, mirrors the number of arrests we had statewide just 5 years ago. So we are now in Pennington County dealing with the same level of drug use that the entire state was dealing with, and we're bearing the cost of that alone. We have got to do something different, but what we've got to start with is, at the moment of arrest, what can we do to start to change behavior?
Is this a money solution? Is it a legislation solution? What is it?
It always starts with money and the promise of reinvestment. You know, we call this the Criminal Justice Reinvestment Act. There has been reformation, but there has not been a great deal of reinvestment. So I think that that's one of the places that we have to go. We have to be more creative about where we look for solutions. Like I said, we've been working with some of our tribal partners to see what we can do to place potentially tribal members who are in the justice system into facilities that are paid for under 638 contracts, for instance. So we're looking for other options, but it absolutely has to start with the legislature deciding that they're going to live up to the promise that the money saved, not building a second women's prison, not building a third men's prison, that money will in fact be reinvested. Because otherwise we're simply paying for it on the county side, and we're paying for it on the human scale with the defendants and the people that they victimize.
Deanna Nolan is the clinical director of the Care Campus here in Rapid City. As you look at it, what is that balance between punishment and treatment and having the best outcome in the end?
I'm kind of with Mark here. It starts at the beginning. If we can get folks into treatment services right away, that will go a long ways. However, with the methamphetamine addiction, you need to have basically a residential component, because if you release them out to the streets, they're not able to maintain any kind of abstinence from methamphetamine. And I think with the care campus, we're moving forward with some additional residential beds that should help to open up some additional services.
What additionally? What do you need? What else would you need to get done?
Money.
What you need to done?
A lot of money. Funding is a big issue. And quite honestly, the more funding you have, the more you're able to provide.
Now, you mentioned one of the problems is getting people to come in to get treatment. Can you force people to do that and have success? Or to have success, do they have to do this of their own?
I would think if we have a little bit of legal leeway, there may be some options for forcing people into treatment. I don't know that for sure. That's probably more of a Mark question.
Can you force people into treatment, Mark?
You can provide them with incentives to come into treatment. It's what our drug courts have been all about from the very beginning when they were founded in 1988 with the very first drug courts in this country. The idea is at that moment that that person who might have wanted to get off of drugs anyway, for reasons of their own, now has a particular motivation to do so because they're looking at jail time, they're looking at prison time, they're looking at having their children be placed in someone else's home. All of those things can help be motivators, but you have to continue that motivation. You have to be able to say you need to be successful. You can't just enter the program and then walk away 3 days later like Deanna was talking about and have any kind of success. And so it is the stick that has to go with the carrot.
Kevin Thom is the sheriff here in Pennington County. Kevin, how do you see that balance between punishment, incarceration, treatment? Where does that all lie?
Well, it goes back to what we talked originally. You got to have all three components to make it effective. And Mark's right. I mean, we have a good system here with the courts, the state's attorney, public defender, law enforcement. So providing that incentive, because you can't literally force somebody in, but through incentives, as an alternative to going to the penitentiary, going to get treatment, that's how you win. And we do have some things coming online. October, November, we'll have the balance of the second floor done at the care campus. We'll have 64 residential treatment beds, 32 male, 32 female, and that's a significant increase from what we currently have. It goes back to what Deanna said, though. It's going to be tied to funding. Now, Governor Nolan, her budget that she proposed, it yet has to be approved by the legislature. There's an additional $4.1 million for methamphetamine treatment. There's some millions of dollars for opioid treatment that has come into the state, through the federal government. So if we can tap into some of those resources here in Rapid City and other communities, that'll make a difference.
Now, you guys went from the old detox facility. Now you have added the care campus. What additional options does that give you?
Yeah, well, we increased our capacity is the main thing with detox, what we call safe beds or safe solutions. And on the safe solution side, we added a female component, which we didn't have before. And then again, this is going to allow us to add the 64 beds upstairs. And then also we have a partnership with Behavior Management Services. So we have the Crisis Care Center in the facility. So now we have a qualified mental health professional on staff 24/7, 365. So they can come over to the other side of the detox side of the facility, help us, or we can bring somebody to that side of the facility and help us out, because there's a lot of co-occurring disorders when you talk about drugs and mental health. There's a high percent of co-occurring disorders, so having that mental health component in the building is critical.
All right, we've got to take another break. We'll continue our look at the meth crisis when we come back with this month's edition of Focus. And good evening, I'm Jack Caudill. Welcome back to this month's edition of Focus, talking about the methamphetamine epidemic here in western South Dakota. Deanna Nolan is the clinical director of the care campus here in Rapid City. Deanna, is there a typical meth user? Is it I think people sometimes have in their mind a picture of what a meth user is. Do they come from everywhere?
They come from everywhere, young to old, all walks of life, people who may be homeless, people who have a lot of resources available to them. There's just no typical meth user. Could be anybody.
How about young people? How young are we seeing the problem in this area?
I've seen a lot of people through assessments start using as early as 10, 11, 12 years old. It may not become a problem until their later teens and early 20s, but they can start very young.
And how do you combat that with young people? Is there a way? How do you keep young people from getting into that cycle?
I think prevention. Sheriff Thom talked about that earlier. Prevention is a big key component of that, and that's something we lost a long time ago. The prevention funding went away, and that needs to be reinvented.
Kevin Thom, as you said, is the Pennington County Sheriff. Kevin, we had those campaigns in the past. You would see the pictures of the teeth and see what meth has done. How important is that, and what does that do to try to keep this problem from starting in a new round of people?
Well, prevention is critical, and it's easier and cheaper to prevent something than it is to treat it or address it through the criminal justice system. So kids in particular, but it impacts adults too, but kids in particular, if we can get on top of the prevention piece and raise the awareness, and shows like this are doing just that, so I appreciate you having us on here to talk about it, but prevention is absolutely essential.
Is that a money thing too? Do you just need the funding to get those programs going, or is the idea behind those programs disappeared?
No, it's a funding, funding need like everything else, and again, Governor Nolan, I know in her budget that she presented, there's additional dollars in there for prevention services in the state. I don't recall the amount. We're doing some things locally on a small scale. We have our little weekly thermometer we put out that shows the number of drug arrests last year, this year, and talk about, one, how to report a crime if somebody's dealing drugs, and two, if you know somebody that needs treatment services, how to link them with services. So on a local scale, we're trying to raise that awareness every day.
Now, Mark Vargo, Pennington County State's Attorney, as you look at it, how important is the prevention element of this, and what's going to take to get that going?
I think that some of the things that we're doing are very positive, but we have lost a lot of the kind of dedicated workforce, and that's where the funding comes in. It's not just that you're throwing money at a problem, so you need people who are working this full time, who understand it, who can really get out there. So programs like Lifeways that had a lot of federal funding, that's largely dried up. I know that Governor Nolan just today issued a press release where she's calling on the federal government to assist us in meth prevention money through the Health and Human Services Department. I certainly applaud that effort, and I would like to see it come home to roost, but I don't think we can wait for the federal government. I think we need to be doing what we can. And so we do a lot with our diversion programs to try to get people into the right non-profit type organizations that might help with that. Kids that are at risk but not yet using methamphetamine, so the kids that are minor in consumption or marijuana possession, trying to get that interrupted before we get to the methamphetamine or opiate level is one of the things that we can do in the criminal justice system. Be even better, though, if we could interrupt it before these kids are using mind-altering substances of any kind.
Now, Deanna, are you seeing other drugs that lead people up to meth? Are they starting with meth? Are they starting with pot and then moving up? Or how does that seem to progress?
I don't think there's any typical way to lead to meth. I've seen it both ways. It can start as early as alcohol, nicotine. I've seen some go straight to meth and have never used anything else. It's just not, there's no typical pathway to get to methamphetamine.
How do we compare to other areas of the country?
We do seem to be much more meth focused. A lot of my fellow prosecutors across the country that I work with are dealing with a much bigger opiate epidemic than we are. A lot of them faced a much larger cocaine buzz, either cocaine or crack cocaine, particularly in the 90s and early 2000s. We have always been, it seems, methamphetamine has been the hard drug of choice, or amphetamine and methamphetamine, in western South Dakota for as long as I've been here, since 1992.
And Kevin Thom, Pennington County Sheriff, almost out of time. You said you've been seeing the meth since you started with the Sheriff's Office, you said in '83?
I started with the DCI Division of Criminal Investigation in 1982, working drug investigations here in the hills, and methamphetamine was always present at that time, just not on the scale that it is today.
Did you at that point ever picture it getting to the point where it is now?
I did not, no.
All right, we are just about out of time. I want to thank you guys all for coming up. Kevin Thom, Pennington County Sheriff, Pennington County State's Attorney Mark Vargo, and Deanna Nolan, the Clinical Director of the Care Campus with Addiction Treatment Services. Thank you guys for coming up. See you again the first Sunday night of next month with Focus.